You never think about flipping a light switch. But for almost all of human history, the dark was something people had to survive. It ruled the ones who couldn't pay to push it back. This is how they lived before the switch on the wall, and what it cost them to hold back the night. For 70,000 years, every pushback against the dark was partial. A hollowed stone with animal fat and a moss wick. A tallow candle that took hours to make and burned down in an hour. Whale oil at a price that runs from a few dollars to several hundred a gallon in today's money, depending on the grade and the year. Whoever held the flame held power over their own evening, and most people could not afford it. What changed was not the bulb. It was the switch, the wire, and the half-century it took for the wire to reach the last farmhouse. And what that fight cost, in sleep, in safety, in money, is something we have completely forgotten. When the sun went down, the day ended. Not slowed, ended. For almost everyone who ever lived, sundown was a wall. In the homes of the poor, there was no flame at all. The family lay down in the dark, perhaps a hearth's last ember throwing a dull glow on the far wall, and waited for morning. In better homes, someone lit a candle or a small oil lamp, and the room shrank to the radius of the flame. Beyond that circle was the dark again. Beyond the dark, the world that could not be reached until the sun came back. 70,000 years ago, someone hollowed a stone, filled it with animal fat, and floated a moss wick in it. That was a lamp. By the time of the pharaohs, people were pouring tallow into molds. By the 1700s, a colonial Williamsburg chandler sold tallow candles by the pound, and the price ran high enough that his customers bought as few as they could, because every candle was an hour of labor traded for an hour of flame. Stand in that shop at dusk in the 1750s. A woman comes in before her husband returns. She has a few coins. She needs enough light to mend a shirt, put the children to bed, set the table. She asks for half a pound. The chandler has poured every mold himself. He weighs the tallow. He knows what she is paying, an hour of usable flame, maybe two, and then she sits in the dark again. Behind her, a wealthier customer is buying spermaceti, wax from the head of a sperm whale, hard and white, almost smokeless. She will light 6 of them in the parlor. The chandler will not ask why. He knows. She can afford to make the dark look pretty. This is the world the dark built. One room burning bright, while the rest of the house slept in shadow. A street where the rich walked under their own private lamps, and the poor walked home by none. An evening in which the candle on the table decided, by its size, what work could be done and what could not. And the dark did not merely wait at the door. It organized the whole day. A family rose when there was light enough to see by, and stopped when there was not. A traveler on a country road timed his journey by the sun, because stopping in the dark meant sleeping in a ditch. The day was not what the clock said it was. The day was what the light allowed. For 70,000 years, the only answer to the dark was fire of some kind, and fire was always expensive, always dangerous, and never enough. The argon lamp of 1780 multiplied the brightness of an ordinary oil flame several times over. Humphrey Davy demonstrated an electric arc between carbon rods in 1809, a light so intense it became a fixture of his public lectures at the Royal Institution. None of it reached the ordinary home. Each improvement widened the gap between the houses that burned bright and the houses that did not. Now the strangest part, and the part no one alive today remembers. Pre-industrial humans did not sleep through the night. They slept in 2 shifts. They went to bed shortly after dusk and slept for 3 or 4 hours. An English court record from April 1699 calls this stretch first sleep. They then rose for 1 to 3 hours in the dark, then went back to bed for a second stretch until dawn. The earliest written hint of this pattern came from a courtroom in northern England. A 9-year-old girl named Jane Rowland was testifying about a visitor who had come to her mother's house late at night. She said something a modern ear does not expect. She and her mother, she explained, had already risen from their first sleep. The historian A. Roger Ekirch has spent years combing through diaries, court records, and medical texts, and has argued that Jane Rowland's offhand phrase is the single most revealing sentence in the archive of pre-industrial life. It means the night was not, as we assume, a single unconscious stretch. It was two sleeps with a gap in the middle, lived by almost everyone. That gap had a name. People called it the watch. It was not idle time. Pre-industrial households rose into it the way a modern commuter rises for coffee. Someone banked the fire so it would survive until morning, since a hearth fire left to itself burned down to ash by 3. Someone went to the privy, or more often urinated into the hearth itself, because the privy was too dark to reach across an unfamiliar room. Someone peeled the dried rushes that were stripped and laid on the floor for warmth, or sat soaking fresh rushes in fat to make rushlights, the cheapest candle known. Someone prayed. St. Benedict's rule, written in the 6th century, required monks to rise at midnight for psalms and confessions, and that practice spread outward from the monasteries into ordinary households. Someone smoked tobacco where it was available. Someone read by the last of the fire's glow, and parents talked with their children in the dark, because there was no other time. Couples too. A 16th century French physician named Laurent Joubert observed that married people enjoyed each other more after the first sleep, when they had more leisure and did it better. The watch, in his telling, was not merely a quiet hour. It was a social hour, when the household was awake together, when the day's work was done, when the dark pressed in close enough that conversation came easily. To step into the watch is to step into a world no modern adult has inhabited. The fire is low. The bed is shared with children, and sometimes with a grandparent or a sick relative. There is an hour or two before the body will accept the second sleep. There is nothing to do but the small things. Feed the fire, check the children, sit with the family in the dim glow. No one wrote of this hour as wasted. They wrote of it as theirs. Ekirch found hundreds of such references across England, France, Italy, and Germany, across 3 centuries from the late Middle Ages until the spread of cheap artificial lighting in the 19th. The pattern was so ordinary that no one thought to describe it as remarkable, the way no one describes breathing. What broke it was electric light. The first generation that could read past midnight, work past midnight, stay awake past midnight by choice, discovered that their bodies would no longer drop back into the second sleep the way their grandparents' bodies had. The first sleep and the watch collapsed into one long, broken stretch, and then, over a few decades, into the long, unbroken stretch we now call a normal night. We have inherited a sleep we did not choose. The 8 hours of unbroken dark that we treat as natural was, in fact, the first thing the switch on the wall destroyed, quietly, and without anyone quite noticing what had been given up. The cheapest light in the world cost something no one could hide from. It cost labor, and the labor was the days. A boy named James Lackington was apprenticed to a shoemaker in the west of England in the 1760s. He later remembered the rule of his master's house. In the summer, he had only worked as long as he could see without a candle. In the winter, he worked from 6 in the morning until 10 at night. Even then, the candle by which he stitched was the smallest tallow the chandler sold, and he was expected not to waste it. The dark did not merely end his day, it decided the length of his day. Another apprentice, in another trade, learned to read that way. He paid a master's son 3 halfpence for each hour of spelling lessons, and the lessons were given in the dark, because the household rule was no candle after the children had been sent upstairs to bed. He could not see the letters, but he had them in his memory from earlier in the day, and so he spelled them out loud. This is how a literate working class was made in the 18th century. In stolen minutes, in the dark, by children who paid for the privilege. To step back into those households is to feel the daily arithmetic of light. A pound of tallow candles bought at a price no working family could ignore. A gallon of whale oil, expensive enough in modern money to make a thrifty man wince. an oil lamp that burned clean enough to read by, owned by perhaps 1 in 20 households. Most families owned 1 candle between them, and they used it the way a modern family rations medicine, by the minute, for the necessary thing, and not for pleasure. A tallow candle was also a clock. It burned down in roughly an hour. To watch it was to watch the day's last light disappear. Families who could afford 2 candles let the second die in its socket while they read aloud to each other because the wick drowned itself in the last half-inch of tallow and gave up a small, smoky, final glow. It was a small ritual. Everyone who lived by it remembers it. No one thinks about what it meant. And it was not only the poor who felt the cost. The rich who burned bright paid in another currency. A tallow candle could ignite a curtain. An oil lamp could spill and burn down a house. Gaslighting, which began to replace oil in the wealthier streets of London and New York in the 1820s and 1830s, could explode. And did, often enough that newspapers carried the names of the buildings that had been torn apart. The family who could afford gaslight had simply exchanged the danger of fire for the danger of explosion. The dark was pushed back, but it was not defeated. The body count fell hardest on the very young, the very old, and the very poor. Candle fires gutted tenements in New York and London. Children carried lamps up narrow staircases and dropped them. The elderly fell asleep over their candle and woke, sometimes, to a burning bed. Ekirch finds that the urban poor, the families who could not afford any flame at all, slept brokenly for a different reason. They slept in unheated rooms with infants who woke them, behind walls thin enough to hear neighbors scream or fight. A contemporary observer wrote of them, "They sleep, but they feel their sleep interrupted by the cold, the filth, the screams and infants' cries, and by 1,000 other anxieties." A whale oil parlor on Nantucket in 1848 looked like this. A captain's wife had saved through the autumn for a gallon of clean-burning oil from the head of a sperm whale, oil that did not smoke. The lamp sat on the parlor table, polished brass, a glass chimney 2 feet tall. Behind its circle of light, the rest of the house was already dark. The children were in bed in the next room, sleeping under a bed warmer. A brass pan with a lid full of holes slid between the sheets, into which a servant had put a few embers from the kitchen fire. The bed warmer had been used in that household since before the captain was born. It was used because the bedroom was too cold to undress in, and because the chill of an unwarmed sheet could kill an infant. For nearly every family in America, in 1848, the night ended the same way. The lamp was turned down, or the candle snuffed. The bed was warmed by embers carried up in a covered pan. The bodies drew together for warmth because the bedroom was too cold for one body alone. That this is unimaginable to a modern child is the measure of what the next century changed. The cost of light, then, was not only a price, it was a price and a body count, paid in the same currency. The hours of the poor, the safety of the rich, the lives of the careless, the sleep of the crowded. For everyone who ever held a candle, the dark was waiting to be paid back. On the afternoon of September 4th, 1882, in a brick building on Pearl Street in Lower Manhattan, an operator threw a switch in the boiler room, and Edison's first commercial central power station sent current into the wires of one Wall Street block. That evening, around 400 electric lamps came on for the first time in roughly 82 offices and homes. The firms that had paid for the privilege, and one newspaper that wanted the world to see it working. A clerk on the second floor of one of those buildings reached up and turned on a bulb over his desk. He had been working by gas until that afternoon. Now the room was cooler, quieter, brighter, and he did not have to strike a match. He did not think about what had changed. He had not lived without electric light. He was one of the first in the world to have it. Below the building, in the tenements of the Lower East Side, nothing changed. The hallway lamps were still gas. The apartments were still lit, where they were lit at all, by kerosene. The families who lived there could not afford Edison's bulbs. They would not have affordable electric light for another generation. The same gap, on a continent-wide scale, ran between city and country for almost half a century after Pearl Street. By 1934, only around 11% of American farms had electricity. The private utility companies that had wired the cities had decided long before that running lines to a farmhouse 4 miles from the next farmhouse was not profitable. The farmer would not pay enough per month. The wire would be too long. So the farmer stayed on kerosene. A Tennessee hill farm kitchen in 1936 looked like this. A kerosene lamp sat on a tin table, its chimney yellowed with soot. The farm wife read her Bible by it in the evening, turning the page carefully so as not to pass her thumb through the flame. Her children's homework stopped when the lamp began to smoke, because the print in the textbook became illegible. After that, the children sat in the kitchen and listened to their father talk about the weather. Or they went to bed in a room so dark they undressed by feel. The family's only defense against the dark was a flame in a glass chimney that had to be filled, trimmed, and cleaned every day. And that gave off a smell, a heat, and a thin soot that blackened the ceiling by the end of each year. In the mid-1930s, Franklin Roosevelt created the Rural Electrification Administration, and a year later, Congress passed the Rural Electrification Act. Farmers could borrow federal money, form cooperatives, and build their own lines. They did. They strung poles and wired themselves, often by lantern light, through cooperative crews that fanned out across whole counties at a time. It would take another 15 years for half the country's farms to be wired, and nearly 2 decades more for the last of them. The farmers who built the lines, not the utilities who refused to, were the ones who closed the gap. The half-century between the bulb on Pearl Street and the wire on the last farmhouse was not a delay caused by the technology. It was a delay caused by a private decision that some customers were worth wiring and some were not. The country that had invented electric light left its farmers behind it for 50 years. They had to build the gap shut themselves, reach for the switch without thinking. That is the whole distance. Your hand moves, the room fills with light, and you have no memory of what it costs to fill that room. The 2 sleeps have collapsed into one. The candle and the kerosene lamp and the whale oil parlor and the chandler's shop in Williamsburg are as far from your living room as the dark inside a cave is from a city street. We did not beat the dark by inventing a better candle. We beat it with a wire. We beat it with a generator. We beat it in the countryside with a loan from a government that had decided the countryside could not wait any longer. And we beat it so completely that we have forgotten the dark was ever anything we had to survive. A 9-year-old girl in a northern English courtroom in 1699 said the strangest thing she knew how to say, that she and her mother had arisen from their first sleep. That was what the night had been. That was what every night had been for nearly every human being who ever lived. 2 sleeps with an hour in the middle for the watch. That hour was for banking the fire, for talking in the dark, for loving each other, for being awake together while the dark pressed in. Our children will never know that night existed. They will never know it was real because the switch on the wall made it impossible. The dark our grandparents defeated is one they will never know was there to be defeated. If you remember a house where the dark still came in at sundown, tell us what that night sounded like. The banked fire, the candle going out, the children sent to bed before the last flame died. Subscribe to the Origin Portal, and we will see you at the next Forgotten Beginning.